Hello, welcome to episode 19 of Wealth Talk. My name is Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, and I'm joined by the founder of WealthBuilders, Mr. Kevin Whelan.
Hi Chris, good to be with you this time.
We are back in the hot seats next to one another. It feels good.
It does. It means we can laugh together, which is good feedback we're getting, that it's nice that we're bouncing off each other as opposed to just one person talking down a microphone, giving lessons and dispensing wisdom. So you do your job and be the straight guy and I'll have all the jokes.
Yeah, and it's been a nice new dynamic to have some of our members join the conversation over the last few weeks as well.
That's been really cool. We've had 3 people talk about home capacity, Pillar 1, 3 people who'd found money, had an incredible hourly rate on their returns for finding money they thought was lost, but then they discovered. And then 3 people who talked quite elegantly about SSAS and what they've done. And while these are flavors of what people have done, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other lessons that people have taken and applied a different twist so that their home capacity and their pensions are a reflection of who they are, not a reflection of what normally happens, which is people leaving their money and not doing anything with it pretty much at all, just hoping that things will turn out for the best. And that's a real big challenge, Chris.
It is. And of course, we want to extend our gratitude to all of those members for the last few weeks' comments. So, Kevin, we always talk at Wealth Builders with education. It always begins with education. The Wheel of Wealth 5-step process, education is always there right at the beginning. So in our summary today of Pillar 2 pensions, why is it that this big, huge subject doesn't come with any real education? When we're at school, when we're growing up, we're not really told much about how to manage and grow a pension.
Kind of an interesting thought, isn't it? You can spend a few £100 on a Dyson or maybe more, and you'll get instruction set. You get a flat pack from IKEA and you'll get an instruction set. You don't get an instruction set with the biggest asset people normally have. It's often, if they think about it, the biggest bank account they have in their life when they add it up. But invariably, they've had no real responsibility for basically dealing with it because they didn't know what their choices were, and they seem to sort of fall into it, almost sleepwalk their way in as if this was an afterthought of having the job, and the pension just sort of trails behind. And of course, as we've discovered, if things just trail behind, they're not being driven. They tend to profit the industry massively as opposed to profiting the people who rightfully should have the money. And this is, this works both ways. I'm having a go at the industry, sure. And we have to be very careful about what the industry has to say. I mean, we heard recently, didn't we, just in the news, I think in the recent weeks, where we had the housing minister kind of raising his hand again, saying, well, why don't we let, people dip into their pensions so that they can buy their property?
First time buyers, yeah.
And this kind of recycles itself. I think the last time we had that was in the 90s when they talked about SIPs being used for deposits for buy-to-lets, and then the government pretty much decimated the buy-to-let industry, so they killed 2 birds with that stone. And then, Mr. Brokenshire, who's come up with this idea, I think it's a broken idea, I have to say. As much as I think it will be brilliant to allow people to choose where their money goes that best serves them, I think the pensions industry will be up in arms. I think the whole industry will lobby massively, and this won't get anywhere at all, other than a few column inches somewhere. And that's a tragic shame because, I think it's the pensions industry that gains the most from the concept of pensions. And they're not always as great as they appear to be, as we know from a certain Mr. Woodford.
Yes, the fund manager who's been in the news this week.
Yes, but I don't think he did too badly, Chris, did he?
Well, we did a little research and we saw that in the financial year of 2017 to 2018, he and his business partner still managed to pay themselves £37 million.
Yes, I wonder whose money that was, do you think? I think it was the policyholders and the investors. He got 37 million and a bit of a stain on his reputation, but people lost their life savings, Chris. So although we might be having a slight joke, it's very, very serious. And I hate the idea that people, even profit by some of the big boys, the biggest pension companies in the industry were pushing, touting, promoting Mr. Woodford to attract funds under management. And of course, now he's the rising star that's turned into an unfortunate black hole. The money that's got lost in that black hole is the investors and the policyholders, sadly not Mr. Woodford himself.
So we're summarising Pillar 2, pensions, and hopefully everyone tuned in now has had a listen to the 2 episodes from the previous 2 weeks. What are 3 key takeaways that people should be really looking at if they currently are in a situation, they've got a pension, they haven't really paid much attention, and retirement is approaching, they want to maybe maximise and make sure they're doing all that they can?
Or even if it isn't approaching, it's still part of their overall wealth life. The 3 big takeaways, Chris, for me, if you listen to what the others have done, is first of all, they've all taken personal responsibility. They've said kind of enough is enough. They took stock. They found out what they had. It's not a very pleasant job, but it's not a hard job, is it? National insurance number, find out what you've got, get a statement, no big deal. A few hours later, you know what you got. Then think creatively, which means don't assume that the only choice you've got is the box you've been put in. Think outside that box. And SSAS is a perfect vehicle for that. And even those who are not eligible for SSAS, they could still think creatively and start to begin to build that eligibility, almost as if they're learning how to drive, or as we would often call that, a SSAS simulator. It's simulating the experience of building your readiness for SSAS. And that's a very interesting journey we're taking a number of our clients on. And the third one is to recognize that in order to do all of these things, to take that responsibility and be creative and get an education, which is different from the salesmanship in disguise that really comes from the industry, is to have and allow yourself that time and take time to make a decision. It's not a rushed decision to do anything dramatically different, but it still is a decision that needs to be made. And all this takes time, which is the enemy of wealth, Chris. I think it's the most often used phrase when people say to me, I'd love to be wealthy, Kevin, but I just don't have the time. I wish I could swear. I won't, but it's a matter of choice. And, I still have an email from a certain, not client, because we chose not to work together. But
they almost chose themselves.
Well, I think they did. I think they self-selected out, which is, Kevin, I'm really interested in this idea of being wealthy, but I just don't want to give the time to it. I'm too busy. And it is a matter of choice. So I think the key lesson is to be aware of the need to allocate time. And I think maybe we should talk more about that, because as the foundation program is in full flow, we're seeing some of those things coming out as well from them, aren't we, really?
Yes, both, good and bad in terms of, not having that time, but then some great ideas as to how you can leverage your time more effectively. So so perhaps it's, worth us slotting in an episode in between the pillars we were talking about, just to help people with that.
Well, give people a breather, because I think it's really critical as far as the time piece is concerned to understand that, you only need to give a certain amount of time, because when you know what you're doing and you follow the wheel of wealth, you can accelerate your money so quickly. It's easier money to earn than the money you would earn in a job. So wealth money actually is easier to make than job money, because you've got the opportunity for leverage, and you've got the opportunity for that creativity and that opportunity for collaboration. So all of these things bring more leverage to the equation in a way that a job situation never does. So you don't really leverage your job. You kind of, you're trading that time for money in a linear fashion, really.
That's right. We've talked in previous episodes, about becoming the entrepreneur, changing your way of thinking. And so many people are caught in the time for money trap, working for somebody else. And it has to change if you're serious about building wealth.
Absolutely. And I think maybe having a separate episode on how busy people can be helped to find the time would be good. And we've had lots of feedback from our foundation students on how they're finding time for themselves. So let's share that. I mean, maybe we could even get a few of those people on who've done the right things and started to find ways to create time that they didn't know they had before.
Great.
Yeah.
So let's definitely do that. Let's dedicate an episode to time. And anything else that we need to wrap up on Pillar 2 for pensions? I think we've covered it in quite some depth over the last 3 weeks now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably the only other one that probably makes sense to look at is for those people who've got the defined benefit pension schemes, is again not to close their mind to what that looks like. It doesn't mean do anything. It just means do that stock take. For example, a lesson on this. I was talking to someone this morning, so I wanted to bring it up today, who had a pension scheme with an employer. And in the final salary pension scheme, it said your pension is roughly 20,000 and the lifetime allowance, which is the maximum you can have in the pension, which is £1 million, was 400,000. So what they do is they take the pension income, times it by 20, and say your lifetime allowance, or the value of this pension reference to lifetime allowance, was 400,000. So when I said to this lady, so what's your pension worth? She said 400,000. I said, no, it's not. But that's not a transfer value. The transfer value is a significantly different figure based on the economic circumstances of the day. Now, we know recently when we spoke about Chris, who kindly gave us the story of his pension, which was, around about £6,000 a year. And his transfer value, if you remember, was
255.
200, $250,000.
Yeah.
Now, so if you multiply that, that's getting on for, certainly more than 40 times. So, if this lady's pension is calculated in the same way, and the pension was £20,000 a year, then this could be 800,000. Now, when I told her that, not to make her feel anything other than to say, you should really just find out, because 800,000 as opposed to 400,000 could represent a fundamental different figure that allows you to think differently about how you feel. And as she doesn't have any children, the key thing for her was to be able to control that income, because she's involved and invested in property. And while, these individuals will always need to take professional financial advice, and we will certainly recommend they do that, it just means you still have a chance to think. So I recommend anybody who's got a final salary scheme not to make the assumption that it's the perfect fit for them, but just to look into it and decide, have a look. What's the transfer value? What's the income? If you like the income, then you could bank on that and then build the rest of your wealth on top of that. Almost use it as a foundation, if you like. If, however, it fundamentally doesn't fit who you are, and you're more entrepreneurial, and you want to be involved in understanding the pros and cons of that, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And we've got many clients who've gone through that process, and their life has changed completely as a result of that. So it's just that point that, given economic circumstances now with low interest rates, there's an opportunity for people just to have a second thought about that one.
And we've talked obviously in depth about SSAS, but maybe a more common term for a lot of people is SIP. And we haven't really talked much about SIPs.
Yeah. SIP and SSAS are often used almost in the same sentence, as if they're the same thing. Often people say to me, well, I'm thinking about doing a SIP or a SSAS. So let's deal with that one. That's a great question, Chris. So a SIP, self-invested personal pension, is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a personal pension, so it's a product. And as a product, somebody else controls where the money is invested. In other words, a SIP will only allow two investments. An investment in the stock market, and there'll be a range of stock market investments you can choose from, and sometimes not, commercial property. So the fact that someone might have some flexibility in their SIP to choose different funds doesn't mean they're making their pension work in the way that will best suit their wealth dynamic or the way it will best suit the pillars that they choose to invest in. So, for example, they wouldn't be able to invest in property, they wouldn't be able to join forces and collaborate, they invariably won't be able to get leverage. So there's so many ways that a SIP is actually quite restrictive, but it sounds better because it says self-invested. And it's not quite the same as a SSAS where you are the owner, the operator, and the driver. So if you think about a vehicle with the SIP, somebody's driving, you're sitting next to them saying, turn left or right, and they say, well, you can't turn right here, and you go, oh, okay then. So you're kind of stuck there. With the SSAS, you can turn left, right, go straight on. You can make all those choices. Now, a SIP is a product, so you buy it off the shelf. A SSAS you have to create. And also remember, you have to be a business owner to own a SSAS. You do not have to be a business owner to own a SIP because it's just a personal pension.
No. So for someone maybe who's listening now who has their pension in a SIP, they don't have a limited company, then they don't have any plans at the moment to set up a business. Is there anything that they can do to perhaps improve the performance or some checks that they can do against their SIP to reduce costs?
Well, you think I might have mentioned before on pensions, the first thing I'll say before I do the CPR, which I've talked to you about before, which is charges, performance and risk, is to recognise, though, that if wealth is a matter of choice and you choose to be wealthy, you have to choose to be an entrepreneur. Even if you're not going to be an entrepreneur today, you have to be one at some point to maximise the impact of all the pillars, because having a property portfolio makes you a business owner. Having a business makes you a business owner. Having IP essentially means you can rent it, trade it, sell it, lease it. You're a business owner. And if you're in joint ventures, you're connecting, collaborating for profit. So you're a business owner. So in reality, more people might think first about the direction of where their pillars would go and then let their pension follow that. So just get ready, for the thought process of being an entrepreneur, and if necessary, leave your money in a SIP at present. But certainly look at the things you can control. Charges for sure, because most SIPs charge a percentage. So let's take that lady I mentioned. So say if the value of the pension was 800,000 and she was in a typical SIP, do you want to know what she'd be paying in fees?
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's say she chooses a cheap SIP, so she does a good job, but she invests in funds because there's no other choice. She might be paying between 1.5% and 2% overall. Now, let's say it's 2% because that's the average. That's £16,000 in fees.
It's quite hefty.
A SSAS would be 1,600, because it's not about funds under management. It's just about the administration of providing the reporting to the Inland Revenue and the custodianship of the assets and the moving of money when they make decisions. So a SSAS is usually over the long term, substantially cheaper over the long term. But the problem is you have to pay to set it up. And as I've said to you before, Chris, we've got this calculator that you can plug your charges, your expectation of return based on your risk from your SIP or any personal pension, come to that. Compare that to the costs of setting up a SSAS, the running costs of SSAS, and then the expected return on investment in the assets that you control. And what I almost always see when people look at that, is a massive difference. And, it wouldn't be lost on you to see that the difference almost always leads to the idea that if someone's ready, they're willing and able to get involved, then they can make their money work harder, and as a result, easier to create wealth, and they're not relying exclusively on the stock market. Now, while it's true that everybody should take advice, and that's fine, nonetheless, people can see for themselves and then take the appropriate advice before they make that decision. But it's all transparent, so we don't push anybody down the path. But nonetheless, I like people to look at the path so they can choose their own pathway as opposed to the path that's been chosen by somebody else whose interest is really skewed towards, having funds under management. In almost every advisory firm, SIP provider, and fund manager, they're all trying to get a share of your money. I think there's a conflict of interest going on there, but it's undisclosed. And most SIP people think they're being smart because they've got a SIP, not realizing that, in fact, a SIP and a SAS are completely different vehicles altogether.
No, that's been very, very interesting indeed. And of course, if you're listening and you've got questions, don't forget you can go to wealthbuilders.co.uk/wealth talk. Not only can you catch up on all of our episodes there, but you can also hit the big orange button there and send us a voice message, and we'll pick that up and maybe even give you a shout out on a future episode.
Okay, that would be good. It's nice to see that some people start to do that now. But more often than not, I think people are comfortable with sending us an email, which they can do as well, either directly to
hello@wealthbuilders.co.uk. We've got the Wealth Builders Facebook group. We've just tipped over the 1,000 members mark. We're celebrating this week.
That's nice.
And lots of conversations going on in there.
Yeah, and of course the other group as far as SAS is concerned, where I'm actively involved, is the SAS Alliance. Anyone should go have a look at that. There's now over 2,000 members there. So can you believe 2,000 people taking control over their pensions? That's now 10% of the entire SAS market.
Wow.
Just within our community now. So myself and Mark Stokes having a great time, bringing that story much more to the wider community, really. So looking forward to getting out and about in the country and telling more people about it.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I think we've wrapped up the pensions pillar pretty nicely there. I hope that everyone's, really learned something there and sparked some ideas, perhaps, certainly to take some action or just look at the current situation.
That's right. Don't sleepwalk, take some action, take responsibility, be creative, give yourself a little bit of time, and take your time when you're getting advice and making the right decision.
Great. Let's catch up on the next episode of Wealth Talk, Kevin, and perhaps we can do that episode on time.
Why don't we do that?
Okay. See you next week.
See ya.